Hey everybody, the purpose of this video is to get you some solutions to this homework about the Blackboard submissions, pie chart, percentages, that kind of thing. So the first question is, how many students are represented in the pie chart? I was hoping, without too much of an introduction to pie charts, that you could realize that 10 of them had no submissions, 17 had wrong format submissions, and the other 37 were okay. So if you add all that up, you get 54 plus 10 is 64 students altogether. All right, so you got 64 students altogether. Okay, two, I asked, what percent of those students turned in exams in the wrong format? So we know that 17 out of 64 of them turn them in the wrong format. Now in class, what we've been doing is we've been setting this equal to 100. Excuse me, setting them equal to the percentage over 100. But what we're going to do here is just show you an easier shortcut. You take 17 and divide it by 64, which generates for you a decimal, which has a denominator of 1. So if you do 17 divided by 64, I approximate that at 25, although it's a little bit less. 17 divided by 64, yeah, 20, oops, a little bit more, excuse me. 26.6%, which is going to be rounded off to 27.27, which goes to 27%. 27% of them turned in documents in the wrong format, which is one of the reasons I'm using this as a warm-up, because I'm thinking that's a huge number, bigger than I hope. The next question was a goof. It said, my intended question was not to repeat number 2, but instead to ask you what percent didn't turn it in at all, which would have been no submissions, which would have been 10 out of 64. So 10 out of 64, that's going to be a little bit more than a sixth. So that's I'm going to call that 17%. Let's see how close I am. I keep going the wrong way today. It's 16%. 16%. Okay, and then the next thing I asked was, I said, without doing any work about, without doing any work percentage-wise, what percent got their exams turned in an okay format and on time? Well, if 27% turned it in wrong format and 16% didn't turn it in at all, that's a combined total of 43% who didn't get their work turned in on time, or in the right format, or at all. Which means the 100% of the students in my class, if I take away the 43% who didn't do the assessment correct, I end up with 57% of those who got it turned in okay on time. Which, and if you look at the pie chart, it's actually pretty close to what it should be. I mean, if you colored in half the pie chart, that'd be 50%. And you're picking up an additional 7%. Okay. Now the last question is something that I gave you more homework on for next time. It says you can approximate percentages using multiples of 1, 5, and 10. So in this one, the first thing I asked you to do was, I asked for no more than 5% of my students to turn work into the wrong format. I want them all to turn things in. This is ridiculous. But in order to get it in the correct format, I shoot for no more than 5% of them. No more than 5%. Okay. Now I'm going to bypass number 1, or part A there, which is using a proportion. You all know how to do that. Instead, let me show you this half of 10% rule that some of you may have learned before. So 100% of my class is 64 students. We can take percentages of that 64. For example, 10% of the class would be 6.4 students. Now hopefully you've been in the class long enough now, you can see why that makes sense. Now here's where it gets interesting. 5% is half of 10%, which means whatever this is going to be half of that, which means this is 3.2 students. that, my friends, should agree pretty nicely with what you got in part A. This is the half of 10% rule. It's actually a very clever way of figuring out 5% of anything. Figure out 10% first, which is simple, based on the powers of 10, and then cut that result in half and you get 5%. Other ways are to find 1% and you have, like I said, you have more homework on that due tomorrow. But this is just a nice way of quickly getting to 5% of a number without having to do a lot of formal mathematics. All right, hope that helped. We'll see you in class.